Resuming debate, reprise du débat, the honourable member for St. John's East.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je partagerai mon temps avec le député de Louis Hébert. I would like to thank the member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan. No, right? For his very interesting remarks. Hopefully, the information that I'm going to lay out in my remarks will address many of the issues and questions that he raised, and there might be some that I might not get to the end, but maybe in questions and comments I'll have a chance. Canadians know that pollution is not free. We see the cost in droughts, floods, and extreme weather, but also in the effects on our health. Canadians expect action on climate change because it is the right thing to do for our kids, our grandkids, and as global citizens. Taking strong action to address climate change is critical and urgent. We are keeping our promise to Canadians. We are putting in place better rules to protect our environment and build a stronger economy. Pricing pollution is widely held as an efficient way to reduce emissions at the lowest cost to businesses and consumers and to support innovation and clean growth. Carbon pricing sends an important signal to markets and provides incentives to reduce energy use through conservation and efficiency measures. That is why carbon pricing is being adopted by countries around the world and is a central pillar of our national plan on clean growth and climate change. Over 80% of Canadians already live in a jurisdiction that has a price on carbon pollution. British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec. Last year, those 4 provinces led the country in economic growth. In October 2016, the Prime Minister announced the Pan-Canadian Carbon Pricing Standard, which gives provinces the flexibility to implement the type of system that makes sense for their circumstances. We've been clear and unequivocal that we will return all direct revenue from the federal carbon price to the jurisdiction from whence they came. That revenue can be used in different ways, including, for example, to provide assistance to households and businesses, or be used to invest in programs and technology that reduce emissions. New analysis from Environment and Climate Change Canada confirms that a price on pollution across Canada will significantly reduce carbon pollution while maintaining a strong and growing economy. The study found that carbon pricing could reduce carbon pollution by up to 90 million tonnes across Canada by 2022, taking as much as 26 million cars off the road a year, or shutting down more than 20 coal plants. Carbon pricing will make a substantial contribution to Canada's 2030 target, but it's not the only thing we are doing to cut emissions. Canada's climate plan includes many other measures that work together to reduce work together with carbon pricing to reduce emissions. Pricing carbon pollution is one of the key actions being taken to put Canada on a course to meet its 2030 targets, in combination with complementary clean growth measure under Canada's Clean Growth and Climate Action Plan. In addition to pricing carbon, the federal government is making other significant investments to help Canadian businesses and workers participate in the trillion-dollar opportunities offered by the world's transition to a clean growth economy. In June 2017, we launched the Low Carbon Economic Leadership Fund to leverage investments in provinces and territories in projects that will support clean growth and reduce greenhouse gas emissions from buildings, industries, forestry, and agriculture. We launched the Low Carbon Economy Challenge in March. It will provide more than $500 million for projects that will generate clean growth and reduce carbon pollution. Provinces, territories, businesses, municipalities, not-for-profit organizations, and Indigenous communities can apply. I can't wait to see the types of brilliant ideas that Canadians will bring forward, including those from the Happy City St. John's project, who received over 1,000 recommendations in the first 10 days of their Smart Cities YYT initiative. The Government of Canada is also investing billions in green infrastructure and public transit, and through the Canada Infrastructure Bank and green bonds from Export Development Canada, we are using innovative financing mechanisms to support climate investments and help new technologies come mainstream. Businesses already know that pricing carbon makes sense. According to a report from the Carbon Disclosure Project, the number of companies with internal plans to price their own carbon pollution shot up between 2014 and 2017 from 150 to almost 1,400. The list includes more than 100 of the world's largest companies with total annual revenues of $7 trillion. It just makes sense. Canada's 5 major banks, along with many companies in the consumer goods, energy, and resource development sectors, also support putting a price on pollution. As members of the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition, which includes 32 national and subnational governments, 150 businesses, and 67 strategic partners globally working to support and accelerate carbon pricing around the world. A recent study ranked Canada first in the G20 and fourth in the world as a clean technology innovator, up from 7th place in 2014. And last year, 11 of Canada's clean tech companies ranked in the top 100 worldwide. Companies such as Winnipeg's Farmers Edge are developing cutting-edge technologies that help farmers waste less energy and increase their profits. St. John's startup MISA makes a sleek, smart thermostat that links up smartphones to help Canadians save money and make their homes more comfortable. Power HV, a new company incubated at the Genesis Center, supported by ACOA in Memorial University in my hometown, has created a more efficient, smart bushing that could save 20 tons of carbon equivalency per year if used in electrical transmission. And other innovators are working nationwide to seize this opportunity to protect our environment, create new businesses, create new middle-class jobs, and help our industries compete globally. According to the World Bank, jurisdictions representing about half the global economy are putting a price on carbon. And that doesn't include China's national system announced late last year and that I had mentioned earlier in the debate. Our approach is going to ensure that Canadians are well placed to benefit from the opportunities created by the global transition that is currently underway. Carbon pricing is the most effective way to reduce emissions. It creates incentives for businesses and households to innovate and pollute less. Carbon pricing brings down emissions while driving investment in energy efficiency and in cleaner, less polluting energy sources up. And Mr. Speaker, our approach is that a clean environment and a strong economy go hand in hand. And that's what we're doing every day to help protect our kids, our grandkids, and to help Canadians prosper. The party opposite doesn't share that vision. That party spent a decade ragging the puck on climate action, and notwithstanding what the member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan says, taking credit for a recession or for the Ontario coal reduction isn't really emblematic of what they did on climate change. Instead, our government is using the best tools in our toolbox, and that includes a carbon price. Canadians deserve better. They deserve a serious, smart, and thoughtful plan to protect the economy and protect the environment. And, Mr. Speaker, that is exactly what we're doing. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure if I have a couple more moments to reflect on some of the other issues that were raised. So the previous speaker also raised some issues regarding not being precisely sure about exactly what the results of a price on carbon are going to be. It's an iterative approach. People understand, I'm sure the member opposite agrees, that the supply and demand law of economics is a law. It's not deviated from and has an effect. When we set out the initial price on carbon, it has a tracking towards 2022, and we're unsure exactly what the price on carbon would be for future years. But by examining what happens in the marketplace, by measuring the effects on business, on consumers, on changes in attitudes, on seeing the additional economic growth that comes from investing in new technologies that reduce our emissions, and then we can see exactly what the appropriate price trajectory should be to ensure that we make our 2030 commitments. So just because we don't know something ab initio exactly what the right path will be, it's through investing and through taking the time to measure the outcomes in an evidence-based way that we can see precisely how, where, and when the prices should go to get our reductions down to our 2030 targets. And I believe the members opposite understand that. But I do appreciate the comments that they raised. They're interesting and they're thought-provoking, and it points to the fact that we need to do more. We need to be open and transparent with Canadians throughout the process of carbon pricing, throughout the process of measuring the outcomes of businesses, the conduct of consumers, seeing which provinces perform better based on the nuanced approach that they take in their own individual circumstances to price carbon. We are likely to see that some provinces fare better, others worse, and best practices can form. We can see whether or not industries need a little bit more support to remain internationally competitive, and maybe consumers need to do more, or vice versa. But this is what an iterative approach means. This is what an evidence-based approach means, and I believe the members opposite understand that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Calgary-Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we find ourselves in a bizarre situation where the government claims on one hand to have priced out the appropriate cost of the carbon tax. They know how much revenue they'll generate on one side, but they don't want to show us what the impact will be on Canadians. And I heard this morning at the Finance Committee, which is taken with the Budget Implementation Act, a good portion of it, 200 pages, it's an omnibus budget bill, but 200 pages of it is taken just with how the carbon tax will work. We were first told it was going to be something very simple. 200 pages of legislation is anything but simple. It has an inordinate amount of exemptions and exceptions created within it. So all we're asking for in the House today is to simply get all the information. So both the member for Carleton, who has produced a redacted document from the Government of Canada, and at the committee we heard this morning from the Department of Finance officials that there exists modeling that they've done on the impact on Canadians and Canadian families. So this information exists. I thought this was all about evidence-based policymaking, but it's an unfair conversation when the government has all the information, but they won't share it to members of the opposition. So then we can make a judgment call on whether this is the right way to proceed and whether the details of the bill are correct or not. So I'd like to hear from the member on why is he supporting a government which refuses to reveal the fulsome information that the Department of Finance has.
The honourable member for St. John's East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for Calgary Shepherd for his question. And I think the member appreciates that a little more nuance with that. And earlier in my comments, and I know that he was listening attentively, I mentioned the fact that it's really up to the provinces and their home jurisdictions to determine what they're going to do with the revenue that they create or generate from their price on carbon, or in the case when the federal government implements the plan, they're going to return the money to the provinces. The provinces may very well determine that they're going to pay back that money to their constituents. They may determine that they're going to use that money for other initiatives. They might determine that they're going to invest it in other clean energy jobs which grow the economy. So it's impossible from the perspective of the federal framework at this stage to know precisely what the net end-to-end economic cost or benefit is going to be. We don't know precisely what the provinces are going to do with that money, and we need to take in the benefits into account. I think as you see over time, as I mentioned at the end of my remarks, through an iterative approach, we'll get an opportunity to see how this is playing out, the quantum of reductions in emissions we get per dollar of tax or per dollar of price on carbon, and then how consumers are behaving. And best practices will develop. I mean, I would expect logically that in provinces where they've determined to pay back that money, they'll see a double benefit, because not only will people be paying the tax if they use too much carbon or create too much pollution, they will actually on the back end then receive money back, and they say, oh, I can have a better net benefit and so there's a double whammy there. They'll get a double benefit if the money is returned to their pockets through some other type of tax reduction initiative. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for St. John's East. I wished I shared his enthusiasm that the current government has a climate plan. It doesn't. But nothing makes me sympathetic to the Liberals' attempts to deal with climate, which is a current crisis, than hearing the Conservatives take strips off them for the few things they are doing. There is no question, and I heard the honourable member from Fort Saskatchewan, Sherwood Park, claim that emissions went down under the Harper years. That's true, and I don't think former Prime Minister Stephen Harper wants to take credit for the global economic collapse, which was the only reason emissions went down at all. They began to go right back up as soon as the economy recovered. There was no sector-by-sector regulatory approach. It was a series of press releases. But this government can't claim credit for targets that meet the Paris Agreement when we have not updated our target in light of the science, because the Paris Agreement was negotiated 6 months after Stephen Harper set the current target to 2030, which is unchanged under this government. So I ask my colleague from St. John's East if he will join me in encouraging our Minister for Environment and the Prime Minister to update Canada's carbon target so that it is consistent with the Paris Agreement we signed.
The honourable member for St. John's East in 45 seconds.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The first thing I would note, and I thank the member for her remarks from Saanich Gulf Island, is that in addition to the recession, there's also the initiatives that were taken by individual provinces such as Ontario with the reduction of coal. With respect to the issue at hand regarding the setting of the targets in order to meet our goals, I think most Canadians agree that that whatever we've agreed to in the Paris Climate Agreement needs to be committed to, that the current initiative that we're proposing on pricing climate does not, as designed, go the entire way. It needs to be buttressed with other available efforts that we're making to reduce emissions through innovation, through greening of government, and through the other laundry list of initiatives that I mentioned during my comments. And if the member for Sandwich Gulf Islands feels that that's not enough and we need to do more, I think the science over time between now and 2030 will bear that out. Thank you.